In this video, I'll be going over our other senses as well as Gestalt principles. First, we'll start with taste. So our taste buds are groupings of taste receptor cells with hair-like extensions that protrude out of a central pore of the taste bud. As you see here, we have the central pore of a taste bud. We have the tongue here. These are the taste receptor cells that are connected to nerves, which are sent to the brain. And these cells have a life cycle of about 10 days to 2 weeks, so they're constantly regenerating. And taste molecules bind to these taste receptor cells that cause the chemicals of the taste that we perceive into different neural impulses, which is then sent through the nerves to the brain in order for us to perceive taste. And then with olfaction, this involves smell. And so we have olfactory receptor cells, which are located above the nasal cavity. And then when we smell through our nose, through our nose, we smell odor molecules that are binded to small hair-like extensions, as you see in that photo there, that are then connected to different cell receptors, which sends information of smell to our brain. And then the receptor cells sends the chemical changes to the olfactory bulb, located above the olfactory receptors, which houses the nerves and are then sent to the brain to perceive smell. Then our last and final sense is touch. And the skin has many receptors that respond to different touch sensations. And these are them here. So our first one, Meissner's corpolepsis, responds to pressure and lower frequency vibrations on the skin surface. The next one detects pressure and higher frequency vibrations. So the difference between these two is one detects lower frequency vibrations, whereas the other detects more higher frequency vibrations. And then Merkel's disc responds to light pressure. So really light touches. And then Feeney corpolepsis detect stretching of the skin. And other things that involve with touch involve thermoception, which is the sensation and perception of temperature, and then nociception, which are signals that indicate harm or pain. And pain is defined as an unpleasant experience that involves both physical and psychological components. And feeling pain is adaptive because it makes us aware of an injury, and then it motivates us to remove ourselves from that cause of an injury. And then pain is considered to be neuropathic or inflammatory, and pain signals that are some type of tissue damage is known as inflammatory pain. And then in some situations, pain results from damage to neurons from the peripheral or the central nervous system. And the neuropathic pain is the way we perceive pain as exaggerated pain. And that's the difference between those two. Then next we'll talk about the vestibular system. And this system controls our ability to maintain balance and body posture. This system is located next to the cochlear in the inner ear, and the vestibular organs are fluid-filled and have hair cells, similar to the ones found in the auditory system. and they respond to movement of the head and the gravitational force of gravity. And then when these hair cells are stimulated, they send signals to the brain by the vestibular nerve. And the vestibular system collects information that's critical for controlling movements and the reflexes to move various parts of our bodies to compensate for different changes in our body position. And then proprioception involves the perception of our body position. And kinesthesia involves our perception of our body's movements through time and space. Then lastly, I want to talk about some Gestalt principles. So we learned about the basics of Gestalt psychology in Chapter 1. But Gestalt psychology is a form or pattern that reflects the general idea that a whole is different from the sum of its individual parts. And one example of Gestalt psychology is the figure-ground relationship. And so we tend to segment our visual information from the world that we see into the figure, or the foreground, and the ground, or the background. And so a figure is the object or person that is in focus of our visual field, while the ground is the background around that figure. And so if you look at this image here, what initially pops out to you? Do you initially see the figure, or do you see the background? Or which is which? There's two images that you might see here. One are two people's faces. So we have one face here with the nose, and then the lips, and the chin, as well as the other person facing the same person with the head, the nose, and the lips. Or you can see a vase of some kind. Here's the top of the vase, and here's the bottom. And so this is a Gestalt principle of there's an entire whole photo here, but there's differences in the parts of the photo. And this is an example of the figure-ground relationship. And then another idea of Gestalt principles includes proximity. So things that are more closely together tend to be grouped with one another. And so we can say that we have all these dots here and here, and we have the same number of dots, but because group B is connected in a way that's grouped separately, we still have the same amount of dots, but visually and perceptively, we perceive these dots as grouped together just because they're closer to one another. And then another idea of Gestalt principles is similarity. So things that are alike tend to be grouped together. Here's another example of dots. So they're the same amount of dots, but the color of them are different. And so we automatically perceive them as being similar to the blue colored ones, or the yellow colored ones being similar to other yellow colored dots. We also see this in our real life if we watch different sports games. And for example, football, if we have all players on a field, they're all football players, but because they're grouped together by color, we tend to see these different teams or these different groups competing against each other, even though on the field, they're all considered football players. And then there's also the law of continuity, in which we're more likely to perceive continuous, smooth flowing lines rather than jagged or broken lines. And so in this example, we see these lines as continuous. So maybe if we would write out this line, we would write it here in this way, but we might not see it as these lines merging to this one point, whereas this line merges to this point, this line merges to this point, and so on and so forth. And so we're likely to perceive lines even though they're just made up of dots. And similarly, with the principle of closure, we organize our perceptions into complete objects rather than seeing them as a series of individual parts. For example, you might see a circle and a square here, or a rectangle. And even though this circle and rectangle is not connected, visually, we can determine that this is a circle and that this is a rectangle, even though the lines and the parts don't connect. And so we tend to organize our perception of, for this example, a circle, rather than looking at the individual lines themselves. And then that's it for Chapter 5, Sensation and Perception. Make sure to complete the review assignment and also complete the activity. And then make sure you study for the exam and let me know if you have any questions.